Nonfiction books have a topic, but do not have an argument. If you are writing a nonfiction book and you are struggling to figure out what goes first, second, third, how to structure the chapters, or even what your book is really trying to say, there is a good chance that maybe you do have a topic or theme to your book, but what is missing is the argument. In this video, I am going to explain the difference between having a topic and argument for your book. I'm going to give you 3 examples of each, and I'm going to walk you through how to find the argument so that your nonfiction book can be as strong as possible and have as much impact as possible. This is one shift that can completely change the structure of your book for the better. So hi, I'm Charlotte Chipperfield. I'm your book coach and developmental editor. I'm also an award-winning author. And I work with over 700 authors and leaders to build and amplify their stories. So let's start with the basics. What is a theme? So a theme is sort of the topic, the idea, or the structure that your book explores. So it's really what your book is about. So for example, your book might be about leadership. It could be about burnout. It could be about divorce or entrepreneurship. Maybe it's about motherhood or creativity or relationships, grief. There are so many topics that can fall under the nonfiction category, but those are just some examples. So you can even take it one step further and really develop a theme. So your book might have a theme around the idea that maybe rest is essential to sustain success. Yeah, that's getting more specific. It tells me something that your book is exploring on a deeper level, but it still isn't necessarily an argument. It doesn't speak to what your point of view is and why you are writing about that topic and that theme. This is really important to understand the distinction because a theme is going to say, this is something I want to explore, whereas an argument says, this is what I believe to be true about the subject, and here is why I want you to believe it too. And it might even say, here's why I'm the one to guide you towards that belief. So hopefully you can hear that those are very different. That's a different distinction that we're going to make. So let's talk a little bit more about the theme versus the argument. So the first example is burnout. So that is a topic, burnout. Something I've experienced, unfortunately, but that's a story for another day. So your theme might be burnout is a problem for high-achieving professionals. So that gives you very much so the subject that you're going to explore, but that's also a very big subject to explore. So that's where your argument can help drill it down a little bit more so you're really clear on what is your point of view around burnout. So your argument might sound something like, burnout isn't primarily a problem of poor time management. It often is a result of building a definition of success that requires you to continually override your own limits. Ooh, feel a little called out there. Okay, so now that's an argument. You're getting a point of view, and maybe this person is also a time management expert or they consult in time management. So we're getting a lot more specific about this author's point of view on burnout and the aspects and their beliefs around it. This also becomes something that a reader can either agree or disagree with. So if they read a book blurb that has that argument written in it, they might go, I don't want to believe that, or that's not for me. Or other readers are going to be like, oh my God, I need that now. If I was reading that, I would need that now too. And so that's what gives your book such a stronger foundation because you're not just talking about a broad topic, you're getting very specific about your point of view and your argument as it pertains to that topic. So here's another example on leadership. So your theme might be that good leadership requires emotional intelligence. Okay, that feels kind of specific. But when you write it as an argument, it might sound like organizations don't become more resilient because leaders have all the answers. They become more resilient when leaders create environments where people can tell the truth, challenge assumptions, and participate in solving problems. Okay, did you notice the difference here? So the theme, again, is sort of that territory where the argument is getting really specific. And it didn't even say emotional intelligence in that because it got really clear on what emotional intelligence is important. So that argument is really giving readers the position and seeing your unique point of view on a broad topic such as leadership and the role that emotional intelligence plays within that. So for a third example, the topic is entrepreneurship. There's a lot of books out there on entrepreneurship. And so how do you make yours stand out? And so your theme might be entrepreneurs need to build businesses that support their lives. That is very true. But when you really want to lean into what's your argument within your book, it might sound like the traditional model of entrepreneurship treats growth as the ultimate measure of success. But for many business owners, sustainable growth means designing the business around the life they actually want rather than continually expanding for the sake of expansion. So now you can really imagine what this book is going to dive into. There is a very clear argument there, and that's exactly what we're trying to drill down into. It's what I want you to keep exploring as you were thinking about the theme and topic of your nonfiction book. But here's the thing about the argument, is it's not just about something you're going to put in the introduction or the book blurb or hook readers in, although it can be really helpful for that. We also want to use your argument to help organize sort of the entire book and the principle behind that book. And this is where a lot of nonfiction authors get stuck, is that they have a lot to say, they've done a lot of research, they have a ton of stories and experiences and years of expertise, they have a lot of ideas to share on the topic, and then you start kind of starting to push all of this into different chapters and think about it that way. And so the result is often a lot of valuable information, but it isn't necessarily structured in a way that is taking the reader to understand the argument and then potentially change their beliefs in that process. And so if you are talking about writing a book on entrepreneurship or leadership, you might have a chapter on mindset, on habits, on boundaries, on your own personal story, which is all well and good. But the reader might be left wondering kind of, why are these chapters here? Why is it in this order? And ultimately, if they're confused, they're going to put the book down. And if they don't understand instantly what makes your book different and what's really going to help them move in their own transformation of being a leader, being an entrepreneur, then they're going to leave the book. And we don't want that to do that. Your book holds value, holds impact, and we want to see that transformation for the reader. So your argument then helps answer those questions. So we want to get ahead of those questions so that people are bought in, excited, buying the book. And so that is really the argument, is what gives your book its spine. And so it then helps you turn towards your outline and starting to write those chapters. And you can think about, how does this chapter then make my case and serve my argument? And that's not to say that you're going to argue in every chapter. It's really thinking about, what does the reader need to know first, second, and third, and how do you tell your stories? How do you teach? How do you have the right resources, the right exercises, the right frameworks, all of those pieces shaped for the reader that then supports your argument. So everything in your book should also then support your argument. It should not feel like it's floating there or being fluffy for the sake of being fluffy. So let's dive into 3 more examples and get a little bit more specific in those arguments. So let's look at relationships. That is a big topic, and the theme underneath that could be healthy relationships require boundaries. Okay, great. But how do you develop that into an argument? So that might sound like, boundaries aren't primarily about controlling other people's behaviors. They are about clarifying what you will and will not participate in so that the relationship can become more honest and sustainable. So that is an argument that really gives you something to explore, and it's getting a lot more specific. You could then have chapters about people-pleasing, conflict, communication, family systems, resentment, self-trust, maybe what happens when someone doesn't respect your boundaries. And perhaps you are a relationship coach or a therapist, and you are bringing in your own stories and your own experiences and your own case studies into this. That's also helping to shape your point of view on all of these aspects that are unique, that maybe haven't been shared already. Let's look at another topic that might be creativity. So the theme then might be, people struggle to make time for creative work, which as writers, that is an ongoing battle for sure. And so the argument might be, most people don't need more time to create. They need to stop treating creativity as something that deserves only attention after everything else is finished. Guilty. I'm just going to call myself out with that example. For the longest time as a writer, pushing writing to the bottom of the to-do list, very common. And that is why I coach people through that process and myself. But you can hear how that's a lot more specific argument on creativity versus creativity could mean so many different things. Now you have a book that is going to be more specific, and you can imagine some of the chapters that are then going to support that argument. And you can also imagine what stories you can pull in or what research you want to pull in. all in service of this reader transformation that's going to help them understand what they need to do to unlock their creativity and write the book of their dream. Okay, so the third example here is the topic of career. Big, bold topic. So the theme underneath that might be people should find meaningful work. Okay, great. That's a big topic to cover. So an argument drills down further and says the pursuit of a single passion career can actually make people feel more stuck. Meaningful work is often something we build through a combination of skills, relationships, contribution, and experimentation rather than something we discover fully formed. Now that's a book I actually want to read. Very curious about that. So again, this is an author with an argument with a very strong position on careers. And so within that, people are either going to see a tension that they want to explore or maybe something they don't want to explore, but there's something there to really unearth and discover. That's what's going to take that book to go somewhere. And that's what's going to attract the right readers to it. But you might be asking right now, how do you find the argument for your book? So if you are sitting here trying to assess what works best for you and how to really hone in on your argument, I want you to take out a piece of paper, or you can do it on your computer, and I want you to complete the sentence. I want you to think of the topic of your book. It can be anything that we maybe explored here today or something different. And I want you to complete the sentence. It says, I believe that, ... So write down everything that comes to mind that you believe about the topic you want to share. And maybe you have multiple topics in mind, and this is a great time to start to narrow down which one you want to write about. You can do this for each of those topics. And please write stream of consciousness. Don't judge anything that comes out. Just let it flow. So I believe that, ... So for example, you might say, I believe that burnout really isn't about time management. That's a pretty strong belief. You might say, I believe that entrepreneurship doesn't have to mean constant growth. You might say, I believe boundaries create more honest relationships. Perhaps you might say, I believe that we have misunderstood what meaningful work actually looks like. So those are all beliefs that might have supported some of those examples I shared earlier. And so once you have a statement like that, and maybe you have multiple of them, that's great. I want you then to take it a step further and ask, why do I believe that? Take some time, pause this video, answer that question. And then I want you to ask, what does my reader currently believe about what I want to challenge? And if it's hard to think about who your reader is, that's perfectly okay. You might think about anyone that's ever disagreed with you or someone else maybe in your field that would have a different point of view. What we're trying to do is dig into what else might be challenging this belief. What we're trying to identify here is sort of what is the tension you're potentially exploring. Because tension and healthy tension within books is actually what keeps people turning the page. So if someone slightly disagrees with you or is coming with a different perspective but does want to learn more about the topic you're an expert in, this can help invite them into that conversation and help them grow and expand. So you might be framing your book as, we've been taught X, but I believe Y. And so that's really kind of the heart of the content within your nonfiction book. And that's your promise also to your readers. So once you're really clear on your argument, that actually is so helpful for you in helping to create an outline and going into the writing process, because now you can start to see your reader's journey. Because this book is not just about you and your expertise, and while you're going to use that to reinforce your argument, it's actually about the reader. Who are they before they pick up your book, and who do they become by the end of reading your book? That is the reader journey. You can also think about it as, what does your reader currently believe? And then what do you want your reader to believe and understand by the end of your book? Then everything you share in between, all the different chapters, the stories, those are all going to be the pieces that connect those two. And I always like to think of them as a rainbow. This is really helpful because instead of asking what chapters do I need to include, you can start asking, what does my reader need to understand in order to believe my argument? And that is a much more productive question in helping you shape your ideas into a book. So this question of what does my reader need to understand in order to believe my argument can then help shape your entire book and your structure. So maybe they need to understand why the current way of thinking isn't working. So that's where your book starts. You're kind of meeting the reader where they are. And then they need to see the evidence that challenges what they believe. So that becomes your next set of chapters. Then they need to understand the underlying problem. And then maybe you have a framework that's going to help them understand that. And then maybe they need the stories to kind of illustrate from your own experience of how that's going to help them continue to reshape that belief and even how you came to that belief. And then maybe you also have some like tools or different ways for them to journal or think about the ways or new ways of thinking. And all of that is now what gives you that structure. Based on this argument you've been able to define today, you are now created the reader journey, which has become your outline for your book, and now you can go write your book. So that's why being able to really understand not just the topic and your theme, but what is your core argument in your nonfiction book is going to bring the clarity and give you the roadmap for writing a book. But I do want to make one clear distinction because I've been using the word argument, and your nonfiction book does not need to be argumentative. We're really just using that word right now to hone in on what is the core message you're trying to get through and what is that reader transformation. My goal here is not to have you write 250 pages proving to someone else why they are wrong and why you are right. Your argument is simply sort of the orb that sits in the middle of your book where everything is connecting back to that. So it's that central position or claim about the subject of your book. So it's not necessarily that your nonfiction book is saying everyone's been doing it wrong this whole time, but really, hey, there's another way to understand this, or there's another way to approach this. You're giving yourself and you're also giving your readers that lens. And you're basically saying, here's how I see this subject. This is why I see it this way. And here's what might change for you if you also see it this way too. If you are working on a nonfiction book right now, I want you to do this one thing. I don't want you to tell me or anyone else what your book is about. I want you to really think about what your book believes. So you can also finish these 3 sentences to continue to hone in onto this. And the first one being, my book is about, okay, write that out. But then think about, most people think, fill in the blank, I believe blank. And that third sentence, again, that we explored earlier, is really where your argument for your book lies. If you can articulate this argument that sits below the topic and the theme of your book, it's going to make it so much easier to outline and then write your book. If you are writing a nonfiction book and you've been struggling with ideas or how to structure this or what's that reader journey, this is exactly what I help writers do. And if you want to explore this further, I invite you to check out my Mapping Your Nonfiction course, which is linked below. This will help you take that whole idea, find that central argument, and be able to outline it and set you up for this writing process. So thank you so much for being here. I can't wait to hear more about what you're writing. Let me know the topic and maybe your central argument of your book below in the comments, and I will see you in the next video.